Let's bring in the former Vice President, Mr. Mike Pence. Good morning to you, Vice President.
Good morning, Ainsley. Good to be with you from Indiana.
It's so good to have you on. We woke up this morning and our top story was what's happening down there on the border, because we're being told President Biden is planning on giving illegal immigrants who were separated from their parents, giving them each $450,000. So it could be nearly $1 million per family. What's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is totally unacceptable. Of course, their whole policy at the southern border has been a disaster from day one. It's remarkable to think that under our administration, we built 400 miles of border wall, and literally by implementing what was known as the Remain in Mexico policy, we reduced illegal immigration by 90%. President Biden rescinded that policy on day one. It's being litigated in courts right now, but the reality is that they've unleashed the worst border crisis in more than 30 years, and it's all been because of dismantling policies that were working, but also sending a message south of the border that America's borders are open to people coming north and entering our country illegally or abusing our asylum system. And this is just one more message that is going to continue to be a magnet on people that are coming north of the border. What we've got to do is get back to what was working, re-implement the Remain in Mexico policy, require people to wait in Mexico when they apply for asylum, and let's not be paying millions of dollars a week to pay people not to build the wall. Let's get back to building the wall. That border security worked.
But Mr. Vice President,
just one more example of a disastrous policies that violate the common sense of the American people.
What does this do to the morale, to the border agents? I mean, this is ridiculous. We didn't give this amount of money to our 9/11 victims there. We only gave them $240,000. They're essentially saying, after these people take this treacherous journey where they don't eat, they don't get a lot of to drink, that it is the border agents' responsibility to keep them well, and they do a hell of a good job.
They do an amazing job, Lawrence. You're right. And our Border Patrol in green, I mean, you saw the way that President Biden reflexively assumed the worst of a horse-mounted border agent when he was simply riding a horse, doing his job. I mean, before there was any investigation whatsoever. You know, I started a podcast a little bit ago called American Freedom, and one of my early interviews was with Rodney Scott, who just left as the chief of the Border Patrol in August of this year. And he talked to me about exactly what you said, Lawrence, that our Border Patrol agents knew when President Trump and our administration was in office, they knew we had their back. We were supporting them every step of the way.
Right.
But from literally the outset of this administration, they've been undermining the work that Border Patrol agents do, and they've created this disaster on the border. And I got to tell you, this incomprehensibly stupid idea of passing out up to $500,000 to people whose first act in this country was a violation of our law makes no sense at all. But most of their policies at the border make no sense.
Mr. Vice President, Dan Crenshaw, congressman from Texas, said this: Biden wants to pay illegal migrants $450,000 for their hardship while breaking our laws. For perspective, if a service member is killed in action, their next of kin gets an insurance payout of $400,000. Let that sink in. And because it would involve a child and a parent, each of the families would get about $1 million. But the reason these families have hired these lawyers, or the lawyers have found these families, is because of the 2018 policy, where the Trump-Pence policy, where it was zero tolerance. You come into the country, you're going to get arrested. And some family units came in, and there were children with the parents, but you can't keep kids in the same facility, so that's why they were separated.
Plus, you didn't know if it was their kids or not, Mr. Vice President.
Well, that's exactly right. And, of course, we've made a change in that policy and its implementation. But the important thing is for people to remember, under the Trump-Pence administration, we had solved the crisis of illegal immigration at our southern border, and President Biden and his administration reinvented it. I mean, they immediately suspended construction on the border wall, and they ended that Remain in Mexico policy. But I got to tell you, what that former border chief told me straight up a couple of weeks ago was that literally from the time the election was settled out, people started coming north because the Biden administration, the Biden campaign was sending a message of open borders. And people were literally showing up at our southern border saying that they had come because of President Biden, and they're still coming. You know, a nation without borders is not a nation. We stood for that principle when we were in office. The American people expect this administration to stop this nonsense, get back to building the wall, have people remain in Mexico while they apply for asylum, and implement our laws in a way that puts the interests of American citizens first.
Well, you mentioned the border. There's also Americans still trapped in Afghanistan or our allies. We have these two bills that are stalled. We can't get infrastructure. His own party is blocking his agenda. And then we also have this supply chain issue. In California, the ports are backed up. People can't get Christmas presents. Amazon is now saying the supply chain disruptions were worse than expected. Actually, that was Apple that said that. Amazon is saying they're posting underwhelming third-quarter sales.
How's that possible? The trucks are on my street all day long.
Yeah, maybe so, but truck drivers, we can't get enough people to work in our restaurants. We can't get enough truckers. I mean, it's unbelievable what's happening in our country right now. What's your reaction?
Well, Ainsley, my reaction is that before the COVID pandemic hit, we had seen 7 million jobs created in this country. We were bringing manufacturing jobs back, but we did that by cutting taxes, rolling back regulation, unleashing American energy, and fighting for free and fair trade. This administration, from its very early days, has been trying to spend and tax our way back into a growing economy. And look at those third-quarter numbers this morning. We had the weakest quarter of economic growth since we opened up America again a year ago summer. And it is a result of the fact that they had a blowout of spending, passed it on a party line vote, $1.9 trillion. And now President Biden is overseas with his party announcing yesterday some sort of a framework for $1.85 trillion in more taxes and more spending. It's probably more like $4 trillion. And make no mistake about it, I mean, the massive amount of tax increases in this bill will only contribute to stifling an economy that is continuing to fight its way back on its feet. And Ainsley, on the issue of labor shortages and supply chains, look, you've got two things at work, I believe, as I travel all across this country. Number one is we've been paying people not to work for a long time, and while we suspended the $300 plus up in unemployment, there's other additional new subsidies that encourage people not to work. That's probably why 4 million people quit their jobs in the month of August. We had 10 million job openings. But I got to tell you, these vaccine mandates are driving people out of the workforce. And as you see with this impending mandate in New York, it actually is also a threat to public safety. No one should fear losing their job over the decision of whether or not they take a COVID vaccine. We worked in Operation Warp Speed in record time to give the American people the testing, the tools, the medicines, and the vaccines to make the best decisions for themselves, their families, their businesses. These mandates are wrong, and they are driving labor shortages that are driving supply chain issues, and they need to stop, and they need to stop now.
Mr. Vice President, it seems like the #1 issue across the country right now in local elections that is really firing up people in the suburbs in particular is the schools. And I know you were in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
I was.
Where, you know, it had been 2 weeks ago, Glenn Youngkin and Terry McAuliffe were tied. But now the latest Fox News poll shows that Youngkin is ahead by 8. I know you were in Virginia over the last couple of days. Why is Glenn Youngkin surging?
Well, first off, Glenn Youngkin has a positive vision for the people of Virginia to get their economy rolling and to put the control of education back into the hands of parents. And he's a terrific candidate. He'll make a great governor, and I'm proud to support him. But I went to Loudoun County yesterday just simply to say thank you to these courageous families that have been willing to step up and take what they learned. You know, I think one of the silver linings of the coronavirus pandemic and these school closures was that parents were able to look over the shoulder of their kids and see what they were learning in the classroom. Yep. And critical race theory and the focus on literally teaching math and English through a framework of racial grievances as early as kindergarten has come to the attention of parents all over the country. But in Loudoun County, you all know they've stepped forward. They've gone to school boards just like parents have around America. And they're inspiring the nation to take back their schools. Terry McAuliffe, by contrast, promoted critical race theory. Last time he was governor, he denied that it existed, but then he ultimately said that parents shouldn't be telling schools what to teach. Well, Glenn Youngkin is a candidate that knows that parents and education freedom is the pathway forward to educational excellence and a brighter future for our kids. And I think in Virginia next week, they have an opportunity to embrace a future of educational freedom. I was proud to be there yesterday, and I just couldn't be more proud of all of the courageous families that are stepping forward for patriotic education, for getting back to basics, and putting education back into the hands of our parents.
Well, Mr. Vice President, it is clear just by being on the ground that the education issue was the game changer. They weren't as involved. Youngkin did not see that boost until the former president essentially said parents shouldn't be involved. And then you had the DOJ that declared war on those parents, and they're fired up, and it's showing this election. Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining Fox and Friends with us this morning.
Thank you.
You bet.